Thanks for tuning into the Financial Innovations podcast. We have Manasa Savanur this week. What can we expect to learn from this week's episode?
We're talking about everything about the skills you need. We're talking about buy versus build within your organization. We're talking about personal finance and how it is as important as the work you do at your organization. And just like really small tips for beginners, how to get into finance, how to get that first job or that second job, make life easy for yourself and focus on the right things.
Welcome to the Financial Innovations podcast. We're helping CFOs save money and time by investing in cutting-edge technology. I'm your host, Daniel Villani. Really excited today to have Manasa Savanur with us. Great to have you on.
Hey, thanks, Daniel. Happy to be here. Happy to have this discussion with you.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this episode because, in some of the past ones, we've just kind of jumped into, technology skills, things like that. I think, where your expertise over here is going to be really helpful is, just in terms of the skill set and, what to have to, to get into the financial function, to advance, forward looking, how to kind of future proof your career, those types of things. Maybe why don't you start by just telling us a little bit about your background and how you got into your current role?
Sure. So I started with my bachelor's in finance, and then I literally just wanted to work at a fancy office, which was literally my dream when I just graduated, right? And so I started working for State Street. I had a fancy new office in Bangalore, India, and that's where I started working. And that was in financial reporting. And prior to that, I had only interned in auditing. So my basics are from statutory audit and basic accounting, ledger and stuff like that. And then I moved into financial reporting. And then it just kept going a little and a little more into tech kind of roles where it became more about data. And then, then I started using Power Queries, and then it was Tableau, and then Power BI, and then SQL and Python, and just one led to the other, went more and more technical, but the start was accounting.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, and it's funny because I've used the example in the past, but when the iPhone first came out, and it's always, hey, there's an app for that, right? And the cloud comes along, and now there's an app for for everything. And I think one area where people just looking to get into finance now or looking to advance their career struggles a bit is it seems like there are a ton of different tools and things that you need to learn to really, upskill and be ready for, a career in finance. And I know you mentioned just, a whole big list of different skills, whether it's, BI tools, whether it's SQL, whether it's, this tool, that tool over there. I guess, what do you recommend is the best way to just get started in terms of, like what, if you had to kind of prioritize, what should somebody look into if they're looking to get into a career in finance? Like where would you start?
Because I already started in finance and because I came here from accounting, so I had a strong background in just Microsoft Excel. And I think it's so basic, but a lot of people just miss that point because that's the first database you're going to work with. It's the easiest database to work with. And everything kind of at the end of the day goes down to how does this look on an Excel sheet, because no matter what fancy BI tool you have or whatever you do, when you send out a report, people will be like, hey, how do I get this into Excel so that I can tweak and do my own thing? So I would say really be good with Excel to start with. And also you can always keep it organic and it should come from a place of I need this or my team needs this rather than just going on the internet, finding some random tool and starting to learn about it because you think that's where the world is going. When it's not organic, you just don't get it.
Right. Right. And Excel is something that, a ton of people have too. A ton of people have access to it. Sometimes, if you just want to go off and independently learn certain skills before you apply or work in a particular role, not everyone has a database, on their computers and stuff where they can just start, learning SQL and writing SQL queries against data sets. Sometimes you have the ability to spin up a database, but you don't have a data set to work against, things like that. Versus, Excel, it's, fairly common to have in there. And, what I've learned just kind of from doing this for 13, 14 years now is that every vendor tells you how horrible Excel is and you shouldn't do anything in Excel and buy their product instead. But everything, every report you end up analyzing, every report you end up building ultimately touches Excel at some point prior to going to management or the board or whoever.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah,
you
you
know, it's
always want to see what it looks like in Excel,
right,
no matter how
right.
fancy it is. And also, it starts there because I know I've been in financial transformation for a long time where everybody wants to automate every single report they're working on. And that is the goal, which is for me as well, because I hate to do anything manually. But at the end of the day, a lot of the underlying data sets are all in Excel. So you better get your basics right. That's what I would say.
Right. And when you start looking at some of these systems, whether it's, a BI tool, whether it's a, reporting tool, whatever, you start getting more structured in terms of the data set. And, that's great. But when it starts to getting things like, what if planning, what if, I start introducing, let me, mock up something prior to putting it into the system, it's very, very easy to just put it in Excel, write some formulas against it, test out, prove that it works, and then have it, translated into, a more structured and rigid system rather than, building it there from the start. So a lot of people, they say, oh, spreadsheets are bad, spreadsheets are evil. You hear all that stuff all over the place, but they're great for prototyping things. They're great for taking a data set and just slicing it around and start looking at it from different angles to get to ultimately the analysis that you're looking for.
Yeah, I also prefer SQL as a tool, and you could also have custom query languages in the companies you work for. And it is also a great tool, but again, I don't know if it's just me, but no matter what I get in SQL, I export it to Excel and then I take a look at it there for some reason. So I use every tool. I use Power BI, and even Power BI, you want to at least do a pivot table in Excel to see what it looks like. But again, maybe that's just me, but Power BI is also extremely useful in automating how your report pulls up each day, or if you have weekly reporting, you don't have to build it every single time. Like you have to do it with Excel. So that's nice.
Right. Yeah. No, it's great because, SQL's great. I've, used it for, almost 2 decades now, but at the end of the day, you want to change one little thing about, what you're looking for. And now you've got to modify a query in order to get that data back versus exporting it out. So a lot of this too is it's not about necessarily just getting to the answer, getting to the right answer, all of that. It's also the speed at which you're able to do it where, every one little tiny thing you're tweaking a query versus, just hitting the auto sum button or whatever in Excel and, doing a pivot table and changing around, your views there versus having to potentially, re-engineer an entire query in order to get the same answer. It's much easier to go and hit a couple buttons versus to have to, rewrite the query to be able to do that.
Absolutely. I think it just depends on what you're looking for in what you're doing with these tools, because you can, of course, take an airplane to your grocery store, but that's not what airplanes are built for, right? So if you just want to go somewhere next door, just do it in the simplest way possible.
Yeah, no, exactly, and and it's great getting your feedback from the trenches over there, and that's why we started the show, is that it's not so much just about hey, do this, do that, buy this product, implement that. It's about talking to great people like yourself to be able to see, well, what's actually working for real companies, and not just something that's a theoretical conversation, what's happening in practice. For those watching, just make sure that you subscribe to the channel, like our content, leave comments. We're always looking to improve and looking to see, who our next great guest to bring on is. One thing that I did want to, I guess, ask in the process is, what I'm seeing, I spend a lot of time from the outside looking into many of these companies, and I've been seeing, a trend for, the past several years, just in terms of, it seems like the finance function is getting more and more technical as time goes on, where, to say something like, you're writing a SQL query, I feel like 5 years ago, 10 years ago, people would have been like, wow, you're the biggest genius, out there, versus now it's like, oh, okay, yeah, I wrote a SQL query yesterday too, where it seems a lot more, common. Maybe, you could talk a little bit about, what are you seeing? What kind of have you seen as leading to some of this change? Where you see skill set wise, people need to be in order to be able to advance in their careers in the finance function.
Sure. So here's the basic of the most basic thing, right? We have a lot of analysts and, execution specialists and consultants whose everyday job is to kind of build data, right? It could be something as simple as what we sold versus what we bought. If it's a small trading organization, something like that. And a lot of this used to happen on Excel, and that is prone to a lot of errors. So we need accuracy, we need it to be timely, and we need it to be, in a way where there's less operational risk. Just because someone's in a bad mood or they fat fingered something, we shouldn't, at some later point be like, oh my God, what happened? We don't want that. So the whole thing is revolving around how do we automate this? And if we want to automate it, we need data to be structured. And if we need data to be structured, we have to move more and more into the technical aspects of things. And that is how finance now very closely relies on technology to allow us to do even our everyday tasks. And that is how you want that data warehouse or data lake that you're building. And that, because you have that, you're able to get it into SQL, you're able to pull it into Power BI. And tomorrow, if you want to switch to Tableau or something else, you can very easily do that because data is structured and it's not just kept in multiple Excel files, right? So we want that. And I think that is where it starts. And that's the whole reason finance is going towards technology.
Right. Right. It also takes a layer out of, it cuts out a middleman, if you will, where, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if you were creating some of the reports you're creating today, you're not going and building dashboards in Tableau or Power BI. You're going and calling someone in IT and saying, hey, I need something that has, these rows and columns. And then they're saying, oh, let me design something and give you a spec. And then you got to sign off on a spec, and then they go off and build it. And then they say, all right, is this what you want? And then you say, no, this is not what I want. I wanted it like this instead of that. Right. And when you add up all that time, weeks, months go by, and, that's for one report for one person. Now you go and, look at a large organization like yours and how many people are putting in requests for, different reports and things out there. And, now it's,
we do it ourselves. Yeah.
Right.
In finance team, we do it. We don't go to someone else for something like this. Yeah.
Right. Versus now you can just go and, you can write the SQL query. You can, you don't like the way the rows and columns are. Well, you could just modify the query so that it comes out the way that you are,
Exactly. And that is my job right now. So.
Right. Right. And that's why, like, I tell people, I get a bunch of people, hey, what should I major in college, and what are things I should look into? And I say, look, it doesn't matter what field you go into. You should at least have some classes in some technical field, because everything, it doesn't matter whether you're in marketing, whether you're in finance, whether you're in this versus that. everyone's using systems for automating their job or enhancing their job. And at some point, if you're the person that has to call, your friend in IT to go and do something for you and give you results, and then you start using it, you're losing a lot of time that, other people who have those skills are able to just go off and do themselves.
Absolutely. But I also think it's very easy to learn these tools, and it's not difficult at all. It's pretty user friendly, at least now compared to when we had MS Access and stuff, which at least wasn't user friendly to me. So I think it's so much better now. But I also think you got to focus on the basics, which I see a lot of people not focusing on. And it's the same with ML and AI, where you just use one, Python library and you call yourself an expert. But hey, do you really understand the math behind it? Do you understand the statistics behind it? And when you go to college for something like finance and especially financial engineering and stuff like that, you actually learn the math behind it. Yeah, that helps.
Right, and I'm glad you brought up that point, because that was going to kind of segue into the next thing that I was going to mention is, you had mentioned earlier about, putting data in spreadsheets, and it has to be accurate. You have to have some kind of a process. It's also just as important in getting to an answer as it is getting to an answer that is repeatable, can be audited, can be traced back, where financial institutions like yours are constantly being scrutinized over not just the can you get to the right answer or to the answer, as much as how did you get there, right? So about understanding, it's not just, oh hey, I pulled in this Python library and it did my work for me, so I'm done. It's a matter of somebody is going to ask you, well, how did you get to that? And saying, hey, I just used this library and plugged in, a couple of numbers in my input and got this output, isn't going to be sufficient in order to explain, the end result.
Right, absolutely. And that's why we have stochastic models for all of our valuations, and we're still pretty quantitative heavy in that way, and we're not totally into machine learning. Of course, machine learning is powerful and there's a lot of research that's going in there, but it's difficult. It is still opaque. And I don't think the regulators will be happy with something that opaque. So as long as we can explain it, I think everything's good. But until then, and we also need these models to outperform the existing models for it to be more accurate. And only when we can prove and establish that, we can completely rely on them. So till then, I think financial models, stochastic models, statistical models are the way.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, and just, I think you brought up a really good point there in terms of benchmarking, right? It's not just about, hey, we rewrote our calculations on how to do this. It's a matter of, well, did it get us to a better answer than how we were doing it before? Because, just change for the sake of change isn't necessarily, the best thing in the world. But, if you're going through the process and you're getting to better results, more explainable results, that's always kind of the important part.
Okay. Yeah.
So, I guess just as you're looking to, whether it's enhance existing models, whether it's looking for, new ways to do reporting, whatever it is, what are some of the things that, like, you look for, like, in terms of, like, maybe, I guess, talk me through the process that, like, you go through in terms of, hey, we want to come up with a better way of doing, whatever it is. What are the things that, are kind of top of your mind that you look for, that you make sure is done before, putting any kind of change through?
So the first thing is, I think this question takes me back to something called the lean methodology, where you want to make sure that what you're doing is adding value. And if something is not adding value, you first want to get rid of it. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is you want to make sure that whatever you do at the end of the day matters to the end customer. Because if it's a check for yourself and if it does not matter to anybody else, do you still need that check? How many checks do you need? Is there a better way for you to make sure that your work is accurate than doing 5 other things? Right? So always see if it's adding value to the end customer, you know, And so that's the first thing I would do in my job. And the second thing I would do is, of course, there are different ways to go about to get the same result. But what helps me the most, or what helps my team the most, because there could be some transformations, which is great, but it could be very dependent on the person who's running the process. And you don't want that. You also want a backup for that person, because if they're out, you want someone else to be able to run it. So just finding tools like that, which helps you as a team, especially if it's a large organization, that's where the focus is. And again, these are the two most important aspects for me to look at in my everyday work.
Yeah, no, I think that's great because, more often than not, I feel like there's a lot of noise out there, just from, every vendor you can imagine is coming. Oh, you need dashboards, otherwise you're not going to be a good organization. You need, AI, otherwise you're not going to be a good organization. You need ML, you need that, throw out whatever the buzzword of the day is. And, a lot of people just look at, well, do I really need this? Do I not? This one's saying I'm, going to be falling behind my competitors if I don't buy it. And a lot of decisions get made in terms of, hey, I'm going to implement dashboards because somebody told me I needed a dashboard versus, as you said, take that step back and say, well, do I really need to have this? Is this going, who is it going to improve? What is the impact going to be? Is it enough to justify, taking this on? Or is there something better? Not saying I don't need it, but is there something better that I should be focusing on right now that's going to have that bigger impact, whether it's, to your direct team, to the end customer, any of the metrics that like you're currently looking at.
Yeah, and with vendors, the other big problem is they kind of make it difficult for you to exit out of their product, and if you want to move to someone else, it gets really difficult. And that's like this icky situation where you're like, okay, at some point in the future, if you want to make and build this thing in house, how difficult will it be for you to get rid of that vendor? And that's where things get very, kind of political in the workplace and things like that. Yeah.
Right. It's funny that you mentioned I'm going through something similar, just even in my own business in terms of, especially when you're building things on the cloud, right? Where you've got, the big cloud vendors have their own proprietary spins on, whether it's a database, whether it's a certain technology. And you say, okay, well, I'm paying all this money to have this in the cloud. I want to bring it, in my own infrastructure. And now you can't because it's on a special database that they make only available in the cloud, that you can't, go and install on your own servers and stuff like that. Where, to your point there, just as important as it is to be able to get to the answer, something that, you always need to look at is, am I locked into this vendor? If, I mean, it doesn't even have to be the vendor, going out of business. It could be, they could, come to you the next year and say, we're raising your prices
Yeah.
50%. And now what do you say? Do you say, okay, great? Or, do you say,
I
I'm going
know.
to somebody else? If you don't have the option of going to somebody else, well, now your infrastructure costs just went up 50%, and, there's nothing that you could do about it, and nothing stopping them to come back to you the next year and say, hey, it's going up another 50%.
Exactly. And I think we've all experienced this at multiple places, and, not just with software and automation. I think even with, if you have public storage, I think they do the same thing every year, and it's, yeah, same thing. Yeah.
Right. You start with a dollar for a month of storage, and a year later you're spending $200 for the same storage unit over there. But it's in a case like that, it's important to know that, hey, there are other places out there that that have different prices, and you aren't going to do things like that to you. But it's a great point of just being always kind of on that lookout for, am I now locked into this vendor? What risk does that put the organization at, if something like this happens, or not. It feeds into that whole build versus buy analysis that a lot of companies look to do, and especially now that a lot of organizations are going cloud first with their infrastructure, being able to say, well, do we actually do this versus do we keep this in house?
Absolutely. The build versus buy is a very real dialogue at most organizations. And also, even if you're just going to buy vendor one versus vendor two versus vendor three, can you move easily? That's a whole different point as well. Yeah.
Right, right, and even just like being able to like you said, move it from one to the other, is a big criteria. And even now with cloud first everything, it's so easy to just pull out your credit card and for a couple $100 have this fancy database over here or over there, and it's all great until you come into the spot where it's, well, I can't get out of this. I can't, we no longer need this. I think the cloud is great for doing things, especially like proof of concept where you don't know, I'm not going to go and invest in infrastructure if this may or may not work. And, let's go prototype, try this stuff out. But then when it gets to the, going forward, now we have something production ready. Does it make sense to keep it in the cloud versus, bring it in house, or anything like that?
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I think a small business or big businesses, everybody has their version of the story, and it's, yeah.
Right. So when it comes to like, do we do this on the cloud versus in house versus what, is there any particular, criteria that you use, or, are you looking for cloud solutions first at this point? Or are you still kind of, looking at other things, prioritizing other criteria higher than that? Where does that fall?
So it depends. First of all, this is above my pay grade, so I'll have to, I don't really get a say in this, and it's usually my manager and his manager who have those discussions. But I think the focus usually is around, we obviously want to move towards cloud because you also have that thing of, co-location strategy and all of that going on in most companies. So you want to be location non-specific, right? That's one thing. And the second thing is, again, when you're building, you also need to understand how much of a responsibility you want to take for your models and if something goes wrong. So with a third party vendor, it's easier for someone else to take on that responsibility. And if something's wrong, it's easier for you to say, hey, fix this. And, they are going to change everything in their organization and hire more people or do whatever it is that needs to be done to get to whatever demands we have. And if you have it in house, you cannot do so many things. Or it could just be more difficult. So the bigger issues there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's great. So I guess shifting gears a little bit, I know, one of the things that, we had talked about in terms of topics, for today was just, not necessarily even just from a corporate finance perspective, but from a personal finance, perspective, investing, that kind of stuff. Like where do you kind of stack, importance, in terms of like, having personal investments and things, along with, other skills that you develop?
Um, I think it goes hand in hand. So you kind of get a little better at what you're doing at work, and then you also get a little better at how you handle your personal finances. I think it's just a holistic life experience. I always feel like I should have invested earlier, but then am I thinking that just out of FOMO because everybody else is saying you should have done it? Did I really want to invest? Because when I was 20, I did not want to invest. I wanted to figure my life out. And I think I'm happy I did that. I have no regrets. But now when I look at some stock, which has done really well, and I'm like, if I had invested 10 years ago, I would be so much richer right now. But I think, that's just uh, that's just the opportunity cost. And at some point you need to make peace with the decisions you've made. So I think it becomes a little more of how you are as a person and things like that. So I think it goes hand in hand, and don't like stress over it because personal finance is supposed to make you feel better. It's supposed to make you feel more comfortable and confident in life. If it's making you feel worse, then you're not doing it right. So I think that's just the basic thing.
Right. I think we all have that story of, oh, if only I invested in this at this point or whatever, where you'd be. And, you hear, especially with crypto and stuff these days. You hear the stories of the person who had like, what's now like $10 billion of bitcoins that they just like threw away or whatever, was like, this is worthless, I'm going to give this to somebody else or whatever. But one thing that I've kind of feel like investing's done for me is, it's I've gotten I guess smarter and better about business investments and decisions based on going through the personal investment process, where a lot of the skills that I've learned in terms of looking for value, looking for things like cash flow, looking for whatever, has translated over when it comes to the business side of things, and you invest in this versus this, and that kind of stuff. Like, I don't know if you've kind of seen the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And even, something as simple as stock picking. I'm not even talking about different asset classes. I'm just talking about just stocks and what do you invest in? Because we always have limited resources as an individual, as a business, and no matter how big your business is, you still have limited resources, right? So it really comes down to stock picking and making the right choices. And that's why we usually have large teams at work. And even if not from within the team or within our organization, you still have like a consultant or someone else, like a management consultant telling you, weighing in their opinion, right? At the end of the day, you make the decision, but you want to check with people to make sure that you're not completely off from what's happening. So I think both ways, in personal and in work, it applies equally.
Right. And, one thing that I've, really found is, and this is, true, whether it's, you're taking on a consultant for work, or, even you're going and you're hiring an electrician or plumber or whatever, the more you know about what it is that you're investing or spending on, the better it's going to turn out because, you have more of that underlying knowledge, where I see a lot of people making mistakes, especially when they're taking on consultants in their businesses, the consultants from some top rated firm, and they say, oh, you should be investing in this, and they say, oh, well, this company tells me I should be investing in that, so I'm going to go and do it, without having that underlying knowledge of what is it that I'm investing in, and do I know anything about this, or am I completely at the mercy of whoever's telling me that I need it, to go through it. And I say this coming from the vendor side, where I don't want somebody to just say, yeah, you recommend this, let's go and do it. It's more of a let's make sure that you are informed prior to going through any kind of initiative that you're going through.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power. And I think it just goes back to that. And the more knowledgeable you are, the easier it is for you to make choices. But I don't think that ever ends because there's just so much to learn and there's so much knowledge and information out there. Um, and and I completely agree with your point. You are also relying on some expert, be it a financial advisor, be it an electrician or someone who built your house. You need that kind of expertise um, in order to make your decisions. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it, but the only issue there is nobody takes responsibility for your decision. It's still your decision and you pay for it. So yeah, think hard and long.
Right. Yeah, no, exactly. And, it's moral of the story. If I tell you to do something, you just go and do it. Question everybody else, not me. But, it's the more, like you said, knowledge is power. And I think that we're kind of at an age where it's easier than ever to get the information and have the research done that you need, where I find myself just in anything, like how to fix something around the house, I go and find a YouTube video on how to do it. And I'm not an electrician, but I need more than two hands to know how to be able to tell you how many outlets I've wired and all that kind of stuff, because you can easily find a tutorial or whatever for what it is that you're looking to do. but at the same time, with the availability of knowledge, I think, sometimes it's easier to get flooded with, with too much knowledge. So I guess, how do you manage that balance of, continuing to upskill yourself, but not, just get flooded with so much information that it becomes a distraction?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting question, and I recently had to struggle with this a little bit when everybody is like, "Oh my God, you need to learn how to code," and I have kind of restrained, and I've fought it a long time, saying, "Hey, I'm a finance person. I do not need to know how to code." And I don't know why that was in my head, but then when it comes organically, when it comes naturally, especially when it is related to your work and you understand the why behind things, I think the how and what gets easier. So I did not start learning everything about coding. I only learned what I needed for my job for that day. And that kind of piled up. So I think um, being genuine with what you want to learn and where you want to go and sticking to it rather than, just because there's a course available. There's a course available on every single topic, doesn't mean you have to go and learn about it. Even if you are interested in that space, doesn't mean you need to go and learn, do 5 different courses on it. How is it related to you? I think you just got to sit down and think about, how is this related to me? Why do I care? Why will this help me? And only then go and get information that makes your life better or someone around you makes their life better. There's so much you can do in the world, right? You can be a singer, you can be a dancer, you can be so many things, but why did you choose whatever you chose? Why are you not changing it? Why are you not randomly going and becoming something else? You can, you know how to do it, there's information, but you don't do it because it does not relate to you. So I think being honest and genuine is the key there.
Yeah. I mean, I'm living proof that not everybody could be a singer or dancer out there, but even if you have the
Yeah,
course,
yeah. More courses.
right, right. It's I don't know. I think if I took 1,000 courses, I probably would still be as bad as I am now. But but yeah, I think one of my biggest takeaways based on what you're saying over here is, a lot of it starts with looking at, what is my existing job function, right, and how do I make it better, where, maybe you don't just go and learn, a million different skills out there just because they're out there and they're the buzzword of the day. But maybe you start looking at, all right, here are the things that I'm responsible for and I'm doing. And is there a skill or something that I could learn that improves the function of what I'm doing, maybe what I'm looking to do as the next step, out there, and starting there in terms of, what are things I should be learning today.
Yep, completely agree with that. And also, if you do something very random and let's say you want to move and switch careers, it gets really difficult because it's so out of your way that even others cannot make sense of it. And people are like, okay, you want to jump from this to this. Why? I don't see a bridge there. Just because you did a course there doesn't mean, you know, but there are a lot of skills which are fungible and it can be used in multiple ways. But you still need to bridge that gap and build that story so that the other person is convinced of that story. Because a hiring manager would not just hire you just because you tell them that you know your shit. You got to demonstrate your experience. Yeah,
Right. I mean, it's, on one hand, it's great to say, hey, look, I have, all this knowledge. I have, 30 certifications, whatever, this, that. On the other hand, it's great to say, hey, I know something about this because, I, built a little prototype of it, and, I can show you something tangible that I worked on, that I have, versus I have this theoretical knowledge out there that, I'm sure is going to be applicable to, to what it is that, that you're doing.
absolutely. It's so important to tell your story in a way that people understand and relate to. And I have always thought, hey, numbers speak for themselves, your skills speak for themselves. You don't have to tell the story, but numbers cannot speak, and then therefore I should. And this was again something I learned very recently, that no matter what you do, I chose a finance career in because I was like, I'm good with numbers and I just want to be with numbers. But then you cannot get rid of communication. You have to be good at it. So that's one thing I'm working on. Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's great because, I know we talked a lot about the technology skills and, know SQL or know this product or that product or whatever, but there are a lot of soft skills that go into it too, where, at the end of the day, you're not just going and handing a report to, the board or to the chairman or to the CFO or to whoever. It's that report might get handed over to them, but there's a story behind the numbers that needs to be told, and there's a totally different story, and ways that things can be perceived and understood based on how you're going and saying it. That is also a skill that a lot of people need to master. I know for myself, I'm more of a techie person, so usually a lot of those, people skills, take more time to develop than other people. But it's important to know that hey, it's not just a number's not just a number, right? There's a story behind the number, and that number helps drive key decisions strategically for an organization. And how do we ensure that we're communicating those numbers in such a way that helps drive that higher organizational strategy?
Right. It's also about the context because it goes back to your dashboards and everything. You take a number, you put it there, it does not make sense. But you got to give that whole context with similar numbers and what it means because otherwise it's just lost.
Right. Yeah, no, I completely agree. Are there any like recommendations that you have in terms of resources for upskilling in the areas that we kind of just talked about over the podcast? Or
Um, what So most of these companies would sell these products. For example, if you want to learn about Power BI, I would just say go onto Microsoft's website, see their video about how are they selling that product to people, because that's step one. Because if someone's using Power BI, someone sold it to them, right? Someone made that pitch. And I think I am just someone who's curious about the whole sales pitch behind all of these things, because that gives you like this idea of why it's even being used, and then you can move into the more technical aspects. So I would say go to each vendor's website. If you're thinking about Snowflake or something, go look at their sales pitches, look at their conferences, hear them out. That's a good starting point, and then you can always just go back to YouTube, and I think there's so many videos for every single thing. And when you start trying and doing something on your own and then have a YouTube video, open on the next tab or something, it just makes it so much easier. So just get into it.
right. No, that's great. That's great advice. I know we're coming up close to the end of the show over here. Are there any other I guess nuggets of wisdom or recommendations or anything that you have that we may not have talked about?
Well, the only thing I would just share what I'm focusing on, which is communication. I think as much as you want to work on your coding skills and your technical skills, don't forget about communication. I struggle with it. So whatever soft skill you are struggling with, give it equal importance. It's not less important than something technical. For some reason, we think technical skill is like, the top tier, but everything is equally important. So make sure you weigh your skills. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. If anyone tuning into the show here, has other questions, wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to do that? Is it LinkedIn? Are there other channels?
LinkedIn, absolutely. Just search by my name, Manasa Savanur. I am most responsive on LinkedIn right now because I'm kind of, done with a lot of other platforms and not active there.
Yeah, no, that's great. We'll make sure that we put a link in the description of the video here, for those tuning in there. That way, it's easier to find. But really appreciate having you on the show today, and look forward to learning more about some of the interesting things that you're doing in the future over here.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thanks.